Hello and welcome to our fifth session in this modeling section of Unreal Engine 5.6, and today we are going to discuss about the transform tools, where we understand exactly how we can align and place precisely all the objects in our scene. Come into your Epic Games launcher, double click to launch it. You can launch Unreal Engine and start with a fresh project. I can come into a film here and I will start with a blank project. The path is given here in Unreal project. I am going to call this as modeling practice. I click create. By default open with main map. If you come into the content drawer, in content we have one main map. I will go to file, new level, and I will create an empty level and click create. I am going to go to file, save current level as, and in content I am going to create a new folder called as maps, and inside this maps I am going to call this again as modeling practice, and I am going to click save. I need some components here to get us the basic lighting, so I will go to window, environment light mixer, just click on create skylight, create direction light, create sky atmosphere, create volumetric cloud, create height fog, and then click close. Come over here and create a folder and call this as atmosphere, and select this direction light, exponential height fog, sky atmosphere, skylight, and volumetric cloud. All the five, drag it and put it into this atmosphere folder. I will go to file and now choose save all. Come into edit plugins, and here see that you type model and see that your modeling tools editor mode. So, this modeling tool editor mode should be on. I will now just close this, come into this modeling section, and we are going to discuss about this transform and conversion tab. We have completed create and select. Now we move into this transform and conversion tab. See, basically all object present in our scene, it has three coordinates x, y, and z. Say for example here, the point that you are seeing here, this coordinate point is 0, 0, 0. So, say for example, I will come into the top view, red indicates x axis, green indicates y axis. So, in the top view, we are seeing only x and y axis, whereas if I come into the front view, I will be seeing only y and z axis. All the object present in our viewport or in our scene is actually identified by these three coordinate system. I will come into the perspective view and I will come into the create mode, and I am going to start with an arrow. So, I will click on arrow and I am going to create a default arrow like this. So, as soon as I create an arrow here and click accept, you can immediately see that my arrow is placed at a location of -250, -20, 0. If I click reset here, this will come and sit exactly at the origin point. This arrow has a pivot point. What is this pivot point is, normally when we are working, the 0, 0, 0 that we are seeing here, this we call it as the global origin. However, if you take every model that we create, say for example, I have created an arrow here, and this arrow has an origin point. Every model that you create has an origin point, and this origin point we call it as the pivot point. I will delete this arrow because I have created this arrow as a static mesh. If you come into content drawer map, a new folder is created here as underscore generated. So, I will delete this arrow, I will come over here, select this underscore generated, and I am going to delete this entire folder now. Now, I will come back here arrow, and instead of static mesh, I am going to use dynamic. See, in the parameter all this default, and if you come down here, you have one pivot location and you have three options here: base, centered, and top. Say for example, I create my first arrow here, and this arrow has base as the pivot location. I am going to click accept, and I am going to move it and place it somewhere here. Then again I will go into arrow, and as a dynamic mesh, this time instead of base I am going to create a centered pivot point and I am going to place it here and click accept. Then I am going to create one more arrow and this time I am going to set this to top and I am going to click it here. I will click accept here. So, now if you observe these three arrows, see when I click on the first arrow you can see the pivot point at the bottom center. The second arrow has the pivot point at the center and the third has the pivot point at the top. And this pivot point of the object plays a very important role when you are placing your objects in the scene and when you are perfectly aligning it. I select arrow 1 and I will reset its location to 0, 0, 0. The base of this arrow is aligned at 0, 0, 0. Now, I select arrow 2 and if I reset it to 0, 0, 0, now you can see not the base, the center of this arrow is aligned to 0, 0, 0. Similarly, I select this arrow 3 and when I reset its location to 0, 0, 0, you can see its top is aligned exactly to the origin point here. Now, I will come into the front view here. I will first select arrow along the y axis, I will move it by around 500 units. Then arrow 2 I leave it as it is and I am going to select arrow 3 and I am going to move it along minus 500 units. I will come back into my perspective view. We are going to explore the transform tools one by one. So, I will right click the mouse, turn around, press S and these are the three arrows we have. I will press G to enter game view. Other non-rendering objects are now hidden. I am going to come now into the first tool in this transform and conversion, which is called as the transform tool. But we are using the transform here when we have multiple objects selected. If you have a single object selected, I can do all the transformation here or by using this gizmo. If I select multiple objects, say for example, I will click complete here and then I will select all the three arrows. I will come into transform and in the transform mode, the first mode is shared gizmo, and in this shared gizmo what happens is whenever I am moving it or when I rotate it like this, you can now see that all the three arrows are rotating along the center median of these three objects. See, if I come here and rotate it along the z axis by 90 degree, you can now see the rotation is happening along this axis. See, you are seeing the rotation is happening along this axis. I rotate it by some angle here, say I will rotate it by around 45 degree here and then I will click complete. Now, the second option we have in transform is you have shared gizmo local, and with all the three selected, when I select shared gizmo local and if I make any rotation, now if I rotate it along the x axis, see what happens is now the rotation does not happen along this axis. Every object rotates along its pivot point. Say for example, when I rotate it, the pivot point of this arrow 3 is here. So, when I rotate, you can see here the rotation is happening around this point, and for the arrow 2 the pivot point is at the center, and for the arrow 1 it is at the base. You can see this arrow is rotating along the base. So, now if I come here and if I rotate all the three by minus 45 degree, actually I rotated it by 45 degree, and when I rotate it back by minus 45 degree, the axis has shifted. So, shared gizmo local means whenever you are scaling or whenever you are rotating, the local pivot points will be used. Say even in case of scaling, when I scale it, see it is scaling along its pivot point here. Okay, I will click complete here, I will go to edit and I will undo the transform. Then if I again select here and come into shared gizmo, and if I scale this, see, if I select this and scale it, see, the scaling is happening from this point, and I will click transform complete and I will edit, undo it, and then the third option I have here is multi gizmo. And in case of multi gizmo, say I can select this and rotate only this along this axis, or I can rotate only this along the center axis like this, or this I can rotate it separately like this. So, I can come into the front view, and now I can adjust these rotations like this. I can make this arrow move left or right, and actually it is snapping. If I want to avoid this snapping, I can come here in snapping and switch off the rotation snapping. Now, you can rotate it straight like this, then I can actually rotate this like this, and I can rotate this like this. So, I can have 3 arrows in 3 different directions and click complete. Now, with all these 3 selected, I will come back to transform mode, and again in shared gizmo, we have another facility here known as set pivot mode, and when I enable this, I can now drag this pivot wherever I want. If I doesn't enable this and if I rotate it, you can now see this is rotating along the axis of the median of these 3 selections. However, if I enable set pivot mode and if I drag and place it at some point here, and then I will off the pivot mode, and now if I rotate it, you can see the rotation is happening along this axis. So, in this way, during multi object selection, I can change the pivot point and I can rotate it across this axis. So, right now I will click complete. Now, next here I am going to select any one of this arrow here, and I am going to press Alt and drag it to make a copy of it, and I am going to place this object somewhere here, and then I am going to again select all these 3 and then come into the transform mode, and you have snap dragging here, and if I enable this, and you have 2 options here, pivot or click point, and now if I just drag this to any object here like this, I can snap to other objects like this. So, I can snap the pivot point to over here. So, for this we use this snap dragging. So, I will disable this, and I am now going to click complete, and then I will click edit, undo transform, and also I will select this and I will delete it. So, now we have explored all the options in the transform menu. Then I am going to select all the 3, and then I will come here and choose reset location and reset rotation. So, that all the 3 are at the center now. Next, I am going to select these arrows. One, I move it here, I select the arrow and move it somewhere here, and the third arrow I move it somewhere here. So, I have selected these 3 arrows, and now whenever we are placing it in the scene, the other important factor that we have to observe is alignment. Say for example, I want both these to be aligned to this height. Then I will select this first, with shift press select this and select this. Now, when I click on align, by default the alignment is set to align Z, and you can now see all the 3 are aligned to the Z axis. See, along the Z axis it is aligned to the same level. So, if I switch off Z alignment, you can see these 3 are in this position, but when I click on align Z, you can see all the 3 are aligned. However, when the alignment is happening, actually I will switch it off. I want these 2 to get aligned with this. Then here, instead of using align to combine, if I use align to first selected, and if I click on Z axis, now you can see these 2 move and get aligned to this. However, now if I click cancel and now I want everything to be aligned to this object, means this was the object I selected last. So, I will come to align and this time I am going to select last selected, and then you can see all these objects are aligned to this. So, I have these two options, whether it is first selected, last selected or combined. We have three options here, and the align type is set to bounding boxes. Bounding boxes means now what is happening, all the three bounding boxes are the same, so it is getting aligned perfectly. Now, the other option I have here is, right now I will click cancel here, I will again click align, and this time instead of bounding boxes I am going to select pivots. So, when I select pivot, you can now see, although I have enabled align Z, the alignment is in this order. Why is it aligned like this? Because if you see, if I will click accept here and then I will just select all the three now, and then here you can see the pivot points. See, if you take this pivot point, to see the pivot point I will come into transform and choose multi gizmo. You can now see, actually now all the three pivot points are correctly aligned. However, when we mark the pivot point, for the first we had marked it at the top, for the second we had marked it at the center, and for the third we had marked it at bottom. So, that is why although we have done the alignment, this is appearing at different heights because the pivot points are different. So, right now here I will click transform complete, and then this is the future we have in alignment, and this alignment either you can do it in Z axis. I will come into the top view, and in the top view I am seeing only 2, I am seeing arrow 2 is not visible, I am seeing only arrow 3 here. The reason why arrow 2 is not visible is, see, in the location it has gone somewhere out of the location. See, along the X I will type 0, and now you can see it has come to the center. Okay, so from the top view if you see it, all the three are perfectly aligned along the axis, or else if I just move this to the top like this, if I move it down like this, and if I move it somewhere here, and then if I select all the three now, and if I come into align, and now if I choose the option align along the x axis, you can see all the three are now aligned along the x axis. Now, similarly, if I come to the right view and see it, see, it is already aligned along the y axis. Along the y axis, if it is to be aligned on one another, then I can come here and choose bounding boxes. Then all the three arrows are on one another perfectly placed now. If you click accept, I will now come into the perspective view, and you have all the three aligned at the same point. I am going to come into the front view, and right now you are seeing arrow, and I am going to select this arrow 2 and I am going to delete it temporarily, and also arrow 3 I will delete it, and I have only one arrow now. And I will press G to see my grid here, and I will reset this position to 0, and I am going to press Alt and drag it down, and then I am going to rotate it along the x axis by 180 degree, so that it reverses like this. Then I am going to move this and connect it to one another like this. So, I will select both of them and come to align, and I am going to align it along x, y, z axis, and I will choose pivot, and when I choose pivot, you can now see it is precisely aligned at this point in all the three axes, and I will click accept. I will come into perspective mode. I needed an arrow which has the arrowhead on both the sides. Right now in my create menu I have arrow with only one head. I can align arrow and arrow 2 like this, and I can create an arrow with arrow head on both the direction. However, these two are now separate objects. Now, I want these two to be combined together as one object. So, whenever you want to merge multiple meshes into one single object, we are going to use the feature here in XForm merge. And merge align these things will be on only when you do multiple selection. Since I have selected only one subject, these two are grayed out, but with shift if I select arrow 2 also, now these two becomes active, and the next feature we are going to explore is merge. And now when I click on merge, both of this will get merged into one single object, and when you merge it, you have various options available here, and the very first is how are you going to output this merged object. Here you have three objects, either you can create a new object or you can merge it with the first input object or the last input object. The default is new object, and for this I can give a name. So, I can give this the name as two head arrows, and then the output, what type of output you need, whether I need static mesh, volume or dynamic mesh, I can choose it here. Right now I am choosing from input, means whatever is the input, the same output we are going to get. So, the input that we created was a static mesh. So, we are going to get back the static mesh, and after merge what should happen to this arrow and arrow 2? If you choose delete input, then both this will be deleted and I will have only the merged object. If I choose the keep inputs, now when I click accept, you now have three objects, arrow and arrow 2 along with the two head arrow. All the three are present. Now, if I select this arrow and arrow 2, this I doesn't need it, I will delete it, and now I have one single object which is this two head arrows. So, I have now merged this into a single object. We have this two head arrow, and you can see here this is a static mesh. Since it is a static mesh, if you come into the content drawer and in your content maps generated folder, you have Satvik folder or your name folder, and here you can see this two head arrows has been saved here. So, I will right click here and I am going to rename this as SM underscore two head arrows. So, I have this as a static mesh saved on my hard disk. So, I select all other arrows here, press delete, and I am going to remove it. If I want a copy of it, the best way to copy is just hold Alt on your keyboard and just drag it, you are going to get a copy of it. However, I come into this original arrow. If I come inside the model, I will come into polygroup edit and I come into the face selection mode, and if I select all the faces here, and if I make any modification, I will come into the front view now, and in the front view right click, and I am going to select this, and I am going to just rotate it like this and move it like this. So, I make some modification like this, and when I click accept, now what happens is, if you come into your view, now both this got modified. See, both are modified. So, whatever modified I applied to this has been applied to this. These two head arrows, these things we call it as instances. Instances means the original of this is in the content drawer. In this maps generated Satvik, I have the original one, and once I modify the original one, wherever that instance is used, all those instances will be modified. However, if I doesn't want the instances or that model used in other places getting modified, then I can use the XForm duplicate button. I will come into edit and I am going to undo it 3-4 times till I get back this original. See, undo deform mesh. So, now I got the original, and this time I will select this duplicate and I will delete it. I will select this, and instead of pressing Alt and drag it, I am going to come here and choose the option duplicate. Now, when I click on duplicate, the first thing is I have to give it a name, and I am going to name this as SM underscore 2 head arrows is the name given to it underscore modified. So, I created a copy, and the output type, whether you want it dynamic mesh or static mesh, I can set it. Say I will set it to static mesh only, and after duplicating, what should happen to the original? If you choose delete input, the original will be deleted, but I will choose the option here keep input, and if I click accept, now I got a duplicate here, and now if I drag this and if I show it to you, so now I have the original and the duplicate. Now if I select this duplicate and then I will come into this model polygroup edit, and with face selection I am going to select some of the faces here like this. I select all these faces, and then along the y axis say I turn it like this. So, I will come into the right view and I am going to just rotate it, and I am going to now move it like this, and also I will move these points also like this. So, I have modified this like a 90-degree angle, and when I click accept now if I come back here to my perspective view, and if you see this, now only this is modified while the original remains intact. So, this is the difference between duplicating it using Alt and dragging it, and duplicating using this XForm duplicate. And now next I will come into SM2 head arrows modified. I doesn't need this, I will delete it. I will also come to content drawer, and here is a copy, I will delete it, and then I will select this. I want this arrow should have the pivot point at the bottom. If I come into the front view, rotate this along the x axis like this, see, you can see here the rotation is happening from the center, but I want the rotation to happen from this point. Then I will set it back to 0. In that case, I use this option edit point. If I come to create and if I click on arrow here I used to come down, and in this pivot location we used to set the pivot location. However, now I will cancel this. If I want to change this pivot location after the object has been created, then I can come to transform or this XForm and choose this edit pivot point option. So, when I click on this edit pivot point option, then I can now set this. You have various options here. Center means it will be exactly at the center, bottom means it will be at the bottom, top means it will be at the top, left means it will be at the left bounding box here, right means it will be at the right bounding box, back means it will be on the back bounding box, front means at the front bounding box, world origin means the point 0, 0, 0. So, you have all these options available in edit pivot point. So, right now I will select bottom and I will click apply. If I make any rotation, so it is going to rotate along this axis. So, I am going to go to edit and undo this rotation. So, this is the purpose we make use of this edit pivot point. I will reset this position to 0, 0, 0 so that it is at the origin point. The next thing we are going to experiment with is you have this bake transform. I am just going to switch this off and I am going to create direction arrows. So, I will come into create and now I am going to create the arrow. I will select the first arrow and I am going to place it here, press G to see this grid, and I am going to place this pivot point at the base. I will click accept here and then reset this to 0 0 0, and I am going to call this north arrow. I am also going to come into my content drawer and rename this as SM underscore north arrow. In case of this north arrow, the location set to 0 0 0 and rotation set to 0 0 0, and this is fine. I am going to come into XForm and I am going to duplicate this, and now I am going to call this as SM east arrow. I am going to leave all other option as it is and click accept. So, I got an SM east arrow, and now I am going to rotate this along the x axis by minus 90 degree. So, now I have this as the east arrow. However, whenever I am using it in my models, the rotation here is set to minus 90 degree. When I reset this, this becomes north arrow. I does not want this to happen. When I reset it, it should always be facing to the east. In that case, I will come here, choose edit undo, and I am going to choose this option bake transform. So, when I click on bake transform, what happens is it is set to minus 90 degree, and as soon as I click on bake transform, you can now see when I click accept, this becomes 0 degree. That is, when I reset this rotation, this will be the default rotation of my east arrow. Now, similarly, now I am going to select this, come into duplicate, and I am going to create SM south arrow, and for this south arrow I will click accept. I have to rotate this by another minus 90 degree and press enter, and this is facing down, and I am going to now come here and choose bake transform. You see that when I click accept, this becomes the default rotation for my south arrow. Now, similarly, I will duplicate this, and next I am going to call this as west arrow, click accept, then I will rotate it by next another minus 90 degree, and when I choose bake transform, it will be reset to 0. When I click accept, it will be reset to 0. I want all these arrows, these are very big, and I want all these arrow size to be small. I am going to select all these 4 arrows and then come into scale, and I am going to lock this scale, and I am going to scale it down by 0.1. Press G here to hide everything. This should be the default scale of this. So, if I will just zoom with middle mouse click, I will drag and see this. See, this is around 30 centimeters. So, this is the default size, and this should be its default scale when it is at 1. So, to set this scale also, we are going to select this, and when I choose bake transform, see the scale value becomes 1. So, similarly here it is 0.1, but once I bake it, see the value becomes 1. Even in this case, bake transform, the value becomes 1. Even here, the bake transform, the value becomes 1. To reset a model's rotation and scale and make it the default, we make use of the bake transform. For all these are present both in my level and also in my content drawer. These 4 I want to delete it, and I doesn't want to store it on my hard disk as a static mesh. But if I directly delete this, then I am going to lose these models also. So, that is why before I delete this, I have to now convert all the static mesh into dynamic mesh. So, to convert this, I can select any model, and if I choose the option convert here, when I click on convert, and if I choose dynamic mesh, and if I accept it, say this became the dynamic mesh. Similarly, I select the east arrow, convert, and I am going to convert this into dynamic mesh. South arrow also convert, I will convert it into dynamic mesh. west arrow also I will convert, and I will convert it into dynamic mesh. Now, I will come into my content drawer and I will select 1, 2, 3 and control press this 4. Except this SM2 head arrow, I select all other arrows, right click, and now if I delete this, then even after deleting it, this will be present in the level, because all this has been converted into dynamic meshes. Now, I will go to file and choose save all. We are now left with pattern, split and transfer and harvest instances and ISM editor. So, these things we are going to discuss it in our next session. Thank you.